The sun dipped low across the barren horizon of the open plains, casting long golden shadows that danced across the dry soil and wooden fences like ghosts of what once was, and what could never return. The wind rolled across the earth with a dry whisper, curling up dust around the hooves of quiet horses that stood like sentinels in the distance, their ears twitching, their eyes fixed on the worn path that led to the old ranch house where silence had reigned for far too long. The ranch was vast, stretching for miles in every direction, but it felt empty, not because there was no life within it, but because its soul, its heart, had lived alone for years, guarded by the woman known to everyone in 3 counties as the Giant Widow. Her name was Mayela, and she was not just tall, not just strong, not just capable of plowing a field by herself or hoisting barrels twice her weight onto a cart. She was a force of nature, forged in grief and grit. A woman who had buried her husband young and had not cried at the funeral, for her tears had dried long before the casket closed, when she realized that love alone would not run a ranch, and that men might fail her but the earth still demanded labor, demanded sacrifice, and so she gave herself to it entirely. Each sunrise saw her already in the field, her long black dress tucked into worn boots, her arms caked with dust, her braid heavy with sweat, and each night she returned to a house that echoed only her footsteps, her voice, her breath, a place that had once held laughter and warmth now filled only with the low creak of wood and the sigh of wind slipping through the cracks. She never remarried, she never entertained the curious glances of local men, she never stepped foot into the town dances or church suppers, and though people whispered out of fascination, out of fear, out of sheer confusion, Mayela simply existed above it all, working until her hands bled and healing by the rhythm of horses and hay. And so when she first saw the figure stumbling along the fence line, she thought perhaps it was a mirage, a heat-born trick of the light, but as she approached she saw the truth. A man, broken and half-starved, collapsed against her property like a rag tossed by the wind. His clothes were torn, his face unshaven, his skin drawn tight across sharp bones, and in his eyes there was nothing but a dull hunger and the fragile flicker of pride barely holding on. He didn't beg, didn't speak. He just looked up as Mayela stood over him like a monolith, the sun at her back casting her in silhouette, and without a word she turned and walked to the house, returning moments later with a bowl cradled in her palm and a spoon trembling slightly in her grasp, not from fear, but from the sheer gravity of what it meant to offer help to someone who had clearly lost everything. She knelt beside him, her knees sinking into the dirt. And with steady resolve she lifted the spoon to his cracked lips and fed him a small bite of the stew she had made that morning, and he flinched as it touched his tongue, like a man unaccustomed to warmth or kindness, and for a few seconds he said nothing, just chewed and swallowed and blinked hard against the sting in his eyes. And then she offered another bite, and another, until the bowl was empty and he was shaking, not from weakness but from the sudden, overwhelming weight of being seen, being fed, being saved. She said nothing, only nodded and gestured for him to follow her to the side barn where there was an old cot used for injured colts and visiting farriers. He followed, limping and silent, and collapsed into the cot before she even finished pointing to it. The next day she brought him water and a fresh shirt. The day after that she handed him a shovel and gestured to the barn roof that needed patching, and so began a rhythm, quiet and unspoken, where the stranger who finally told her his name was Calbo began to repay his debt with labor, at first awkward, unsure, unsteady on his feet, but soon he moved like he belonged to the earth again, his hands learning the feel of tools, the voice of horses, the language of fences and gates and grain. Mayela never questioned where he came from or how far he had fallen, and Caleb never pried into her silence or the gravestone that sat alone behind the house with the name Jonas Hale etched in weathered stone. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, saying little but speaking volumes in glances, in gestures, in the way they passed tools and tied ropes and fed the chickens, and slowly, without either of them noticing, the stillness that had once ruled the ranch softened. The air began to hum with life, with the quiet comfort of shared purpose. They rarely laughed, but when they did it was sudden and sincere, like thunder on a clear day. startling but beautiful. And the townsfolk took notice. Whispers traveled, how the giant widow had taken in a stray, a drifter, a man who had nothing, and while some saw it as charity, others as desperation, they did not see the truth, that in Caleb, Mayela had found someone who didn't shrink beneath her strength, who didn't pity her or romanticize her sorrow, and in Mayela, Caleb found someone who offered dignity instead of judgment, work instead of words, healing instead of handouts. The seasons turned and so did their story, though neither of them gave it a name. They ate dinner together without speaking, but somehow every spoonful meant something, every refill of coffee in the morning was a promise, unspoken but real, and though they slept in separate quarters, the distance between them had shrunk into something invisible yet undeniable. Then, one morning, Caleb was gone, the barn door slightly ajar, his cot cold, no sign of struggle or theft, only a faint set of footprints leading toward the road that vanished in the dust. Mayela stood at the edge of the path for hours, her eyes scanning the horizon as if willing him to reappear, but he didn't, and she said nothing to the neighbors, to the mailman, to the butcher who asked politely if her helper was still around. She simply said, "Not anymore," and returned to her chores, but something in her movements changed, slower, heavier, a bit less sharp, as if the silence had reclaimed its hold on the ranch, and yet, when she passed the side barn, she still left a folded shirt on the cot, still set aside a bowl when cooking stew, still fixed the shingles he'd promised to patch. The ghost of Caleb lingered in the places he'd touched, in the saddle he'd oiled, in the fence he'd mended with her, and as months became years, Mayela carried on, alone but not untouched, and though she never said it aloud, and though her hands remained steady, her heart had once more been cracked and not broken like when Jonas died, but fractured in a way that let the light in and wouldn't let it out. She never cried, not even once, not even when the sky turned red in the evenings and the wind carried the smell of distant rains that never came. She just kept moving, stronger than ever, more silent than ever, and somewhere in her heart, whether she admitted it or not, a question echoed through every empty sunset. Why did he leave without a word, and would he ever come back? But the courtroom wasn't prepared for what would happen next, because just as the defense was getting ready to discredit the little girl's story with piles of expert testimonies and falsified reports, the girl calmly stood up, walked to her school bag, and pulled out a tablet device, unlocking it with her fingerprint, and with the poise of a seasoned lawyer, she said, "Your Honor, before you proceed, I request permission to present new evidence." And everyone turned to the judge, unsure if this was a joke, but the judge, perhaps sensing something extraordinary, nodded slowly. "Proceed," he said. And the girl tapped on her tablet and mirrored the screen to the courtroom monitor, and what she revealed froze every soul in the courtroom, because there on the screen was a live feed, not a video, not a playback, but a live feed directly from the hidden servers of the corrupt school's IT system, showing real-time data transfers, financial records, and private messages between the school administration and a mysterious offshore company registered under a chain of shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. And she didn't stop there, because she had set up this access months ago when her mother, a humble janitor at the school, was fired for allegedly stealing school property, a charge the administration had made up to get rid of her after she began questioning where the budget for student meals and facilities was vanishing. And the girl, heartbroken and angry, had started digging, teaching herself basic coding and hacking techniques from YouTube and forums, and over time, she cracked the school's Wi-Fi firewall, gained access to employee logins, and stumbled into a web of lies so massive that she couldn't believe it at first, because these weren't just small embezzlements, they were stealing millions meant for student programs, sports teams, cafeteria meals, and even teacher salaries, funneling the money to dummy corporations, ghost vendors, and fake invoices signed off by people who didn't even exist. And what made her gasp wasn't just the scale of the theft, it was who was involved, because not only was the principal at the center of it, but so was the local school board, a few city council members, and even someone from the state education department. and as she quietly documented every connection, every transaction, every email and chat, she began creating a timeline, a map of deceit, all while pretending to be a normal student, going to school with a smile and submitting her homework on time, even though she spent most nights staring at financial spreadsheets and encrypted files, trying to make sense of the corruption. And now, in front of the court, with her mother sitting behind her, tears streaming down her face, the girl stood not just as her mother's defender but as the key witness in exposing the biggest education fraud in the state's history, and she began explaining to the court how the scam worked, how the school administration would submit inflated bills to the district, get reimbursements, then quietly split the excess through backdoor channels, and how they doctored audits by bribing a select group of inspectors, and how they threatened and silenced teachers who dared ask questions, some of whom were even forced into early retirement or mental breakdowns. And as her evidence poured in, names started falling like dominoes, people in the gallery whispering in shock as familiar faces were outed as criminals. And then she played one final recording, a phone call she had secretly recorded between the school treasurer and a city official, where they joked about how easy it was to fool the poor kids and how nobody would believe a janitor's daughter anyway. And as that audio echoed through the courtroom, there was silence, and then gasps, and then anger, because what had started as a wrongful termination case now stood on the edge of becoming a federal criminal investigation, and the prosecutors who had come prepared to defend the school immediately requested recess to reconsider charges, and the defense lawyers began backing away from their clients, realizing they were now part of a sinking ship, and the judge, trying to keep the court in order, demanded to know how a minor had managed to obtain such data, to which the girl replied, "If the adults in power did their jobs with honesty, I would have never needed to learn how to do this." And that one sentence, powerful and cutting, left everyone speechless, and in that moment, she wasn't just a girl defending her mother, she was a beacon of truth in a broken system. And what happened after that became legend, because not only were several officials arrested within days, but the state governor himself ordered a full-scale audit of all public school funds going back 10 years, inspired by the bravery of one young girl, and the media ran her story nationwide, dubbing her the Justice Kid, while interviews poured in from CNN, BBC, and investigative podcasts wanting to know how she did it, what motivated her, and how they could help her continue this mission. And scholarships were offered, foundations pledged support, and yet, through it all, she remained grounded, always crediting her mother, who had taught her integrity, who had stood for truth even when it meant cleaning floors after being falsely accused. And the final twist came when the court, in an unprecedented move, not only dropped all charges against the mother but appointed her to a new position overseeing ethical compliance in the school district, ensuring that no other parent or child would face what they had endured. And as the girl and her mother walked out of court that day, hand in hand, the crowd outside erupted in applause, not just for the victory, but for the courage it took to stand up when everyone else had given up. And in the months that followed, documentaries were made, laws were changed, whistleblower protections were expanded, and a new movement was born, one where students, parents, and educators started demanding transparency, armed with technology and truth, inspired by a girl who refused to stay silent, who chose justice over fear, and who proved to the world that even the smallest voice can shake the tallest towers of corruption when it speaks with truth.